Today we're ranking every character from Squid Game from good to evil. And as usual, we'll be starting with the most pure-hearted character and working our way down to the most evil. These characters are the good. And it might be a bit controversial, but we've decided that nobody deserves the gold medal of good more than the hero himself, Gi-hun, player 456. This guy is an absolute legend. And don't get us wrong, he has more than his fair share of faults. He has a clear gambling problem, which leads to his debt in the first place, and ultimately in him ending up in the Squid Game. This has also led to a struggle to stay connected to his daughter, who now lives in the US, with her stepfather and Gi-hun's ex-wife. But despite all his burdens, he was always a good man who showed compassion and care to others. From something as small as feeding a stray cat to something as substantial as making sure to watch after his deceased teammate's little brother. He was an altruist through and through. What cements him as our most good character, though, is the fact that despite everything he had been through in the Squid Game, he still went back to track down the masterminds behind it and shut it down once and for all. Regardless of how it made him look or how much danger it put him in, he devoted himself to protecting his fellow players from harm as much as possible, going as far as to go back to save a dying player in the first game with only 30 seconds left on the clock. But taking a very close silver medal of good is another Season 1 contestant, Ali, player 199. It's poetic that Gi-hun went back to rescue someone during red light, green light in the second season, considering that's the only way he himself survived. As a hardworking, underappreciated family man, Ali used his strength for good throughout the game. We saw it from the very beginning when he saved Gi-hun during red light, green light, keeping him from falling out of position with just one arm. He was a genuinely kind, trusting man who was determined to survive for his family's sake while not harming anyone, which would sadly lead to his demise in the marble game. In a very literal sense, Ali's only flaw was that he was just too kind-hearted. The only thing he wanted was whatever was best for his friends and family. Well, that, and for his boss to actually pay him for his work. I mean, yeah, I guess he kinda played a part in having his boss's hand crushed, but until that hand starts signing some paychecks, he's gonna have to strike that one up as learning a lesson. The bronze medal of good goes to a new contestant, Hyun-ju, player 120. She is a kind transgender woman who, much like Ali, uses her strength to help others to the best of her ability. During red light, green light, she helps Gi-hun rescue player 444, showing that she's also willing to risk her neck for the sake of others. Being a former member of the military, she's also able to help a great deal in the revolt in episode 7, protecting her allies and taking out a lot of guards who fully intended to kill them. Her character is awesome, but she's not without flaws. Most notably, after the pentathlon, she votes to continue the games despite knowing how terrified Jung-hee was of continuing, since they bonded over that game. But let's talk about Jun-ho. You'll remember him as the police officer who infiltrated the Squid Games to find his brother. Similarly to Gi-hun, he experienced the majority of the Squid Games terror firsthand, and there's a strong case to be made that the police would have never known about the Squid Game if it weren't for him, even if they still don't exactly believe him. Now, full disclosure, I was kinda under the impression he died in Season 1, so when he showed up in the very first episode of Season 2, having been rescued by the completely trustworthy and not at all treacherous Captain Park, it was a pleasant surprise. From here, he enlists the help of every ally he can find to track down the island the game is being held on, and to rescue Gi-hun and the others from it. There's no denying that Jun-ho is a heroic man, but we have to dock a few points for the fact that he doesn't disclose the front man's identity as In-ho. His conflicting feelings are definitely valid, sure, but the guy shot you, man. It's not enough to call his character into question, but it's enough to just barely keep him out of our top 3. One of Season 2's most innocent players, Kim Young-mi, player 095, is up next. We don't really get too much of a backstory on her compared to some of the other newcomers. All we know is that she's a sweet, timid girl who has perhaps the most reasonable and realistic reaction to any of these games. Absolute, unadulterated terror. She doesn't really have much of a personality aside from being shy and kind-hearted, but she was a total sweetheart and one of the ones we were holding out hope for to make it to Season 3. But yeah, remind us not to do that. Next is Kim Jun-hee, player 222. And you have to feel bad for this girl. Pregnant, ghosted by her baby daddy for 6 months, and ending up at a deadly kids game arena to pay off her debts. That's rough enough. But she has an even darker secret to hide, that she dated a crypto YouTuber, one who unintentionally scammed his audience out of money, making him the target of harassment and straight-up death threats. Cutting ties with him was totally understandable, which is why we really have to commend her for still looking after him on some level throughout the game, even warning him to hide before the midnight assault in episode 7. A quick mention of Kyung-seok, player 246. This guy has one of the most admirable reasons for joining the Squid Game out of anyone else, needing to pay for an expensive treatment for his cancer-afflicted little daughter. In addition to being a great father who's willing to risk his neck to provide for his kid, he also treats the other contestants with respect and kindness. During the Mingle game, it was all thanks to him that Hyun-ju and Jung-hee survived. Well, one of them did. If we had any faith in the humanity of those guards, it was completely shattered the moment they shot this guy while he was begging for mercy due to his daughter's condition. And on the topic of devastating deaths, let's talk about Gi-hun, player 240 from Season 1. She seemed a bit standoffish at first, not shy about openly mocking other players she doesn't approve of, like the pastor. That said, given her background, this cynicism is totally understandable. She witnessed her father, a pastor himself, murder his mother and beg God for forgiveness, which enraged Gi-hun so much that she took his life right then and there. Having nowhere to go after being released from prison, she came to the games because, well, why not, right? In the end, she was the first person to really get Sae-byeok to open up about her trauma, and stayed true to her promise to make sure she won no matter what, which just happened to mean throwing the marble game and sacrificing her life so she could live on. But let's talk about Gi-hun's mother from Season 1, who was why he joined the Squid Game in the first place. When she refused to pay for her own diabetes treatment due to already struggling to pay for hers and Gi-hun's apartment, Gi-hun took matters into his own hands and went to win the prize money, only for it to tragically end up futile, as his mom would die during Gi-hun's week at the Squid Game. Despite her often cold and nagging demeanor, it was clear that she genuinely loved her son, being the one to encourage him to step up and find a way to keep his daughter in Korea so he wouldn't lose his relationship with her. Next is Geum-ja, player 149. This lady joined the games to pay off the debts of her fully grown adult son, which shows that, if anything, she's too good of a mother. Despite being reasonably terrified, she's proven herself to be one of the most decent people in the games, becoming a motherly figure to Jun-hee and Hyun-ju, slowly coming to accept the latter's identity and being one of the few sources of care and comfort the former has in one of the hardest phases of her entire life. I guess the worst we could say about her is that she's sometimes rather tactless, but at the end of the day, she's just a very caring woman that doesn't have much of a filter. Our next spot goes to Jung-bae, player 390. You may remember him as Gi-hun's friend from the first few episodes of Season 1, but if you're anything like us though, you legit forgot that he existed. But worry not, because he'll remind you by being one of the MVPs of this season, always available to his buddies when they need someone to talk to, or even help storm the headquarters of the Squid Games as a whole. The kind of friend who will straight up force feed you if you aren't eating properly. And it's stuff like this that made his demise in the end all the more devastating. Sure, it was revealed that this guy was the one who got Gi-hun into horse betting in the first place, but honestly, he more than made up for things in the end. And rounding out our good section is Samai, player 380. She's a relatively normal girl who allies herself with the people she thinks will give her the best chance of winning, whether it's through trustworthiness or malleability. She joins Thanos and Thanos' friend, come on, like you care what his name is, because they were stupid and therefore easier to manage, which does show that she has a bit of a manipulative side, but she's also surprisingly sweet. She was the first one to befriend Min-soo and look out for him throughout the games, acting as a constant support for him despite his utter cowardice. Seriously, this guy is an absolute bedwetter, and she even keeps him from being corrupted by their other teammates. She just wanted someone she could trust so they could help each other out. But she chose the wrong person for that. And man, Squid Game really has a way with making the most cool, down-to-earth people and giving them 5 minutes to shine and then having them unjustly murdered. But with that said, we now get into more morally neutral territory. These are the characters with a bit more blood and dirt on their hands. This is the gray area. And the first player in this category needs no introduction. Sae-byeok, player 067, is one of the most iconic characters from the entire show, and for good reason. She's a North Korean defector who grew up in a territory defined by war, violence, and fear. When she managed to make it out along with her little brother, she devoted herself to getting enough money to regain custody of him and to bring her mother to the south. Although she certainly has one of the most valid reasons for joining the games, she's still one of the most ruthless players there, and this extends to her time before the game too. She's willing to threaten people with knives or hot coffee, whatever is most convenient, has an extensive criminal record with Yaksu, which we can only assume includes some heinous stuff, and is willing to pickpocket money when the need arises, which, as we saw with Gi-hun, can sometimes hurt others in brutal financial situations. But none of what she does is ever out of malice. She genuinely just wants to survive and make a better life for her family after a lifetime of experiencing war and poverty. She was also the one who helped Gi-hun remember the correct tile jumping order and glass stepping stones, and the one who stopped him from straight up murdering Sung-woo afterwards. Next is Park Young-sik, player number 7. This guy is the son of the absolute legend known as 149, who got his family in enough financial trouble due to his gambling problems to end up in the Squid Game. Not only were the financial losses severe enough for him to get involved there, but they were severe enough to prompt his elderly mother to join as well. This guy might be the most irresponsible of the visibly grown adults in the season, so we have to give him the Darwin Sinner Medal. Even so, he has his good qualities, such as sticking by his mother no matter what in the competition, although he was unwillingly separated from her in one round of the Mingle game. I'd argue he should have fought harder to avoid that, though he proceeded to keep her right by his side and make sure they stuck together afterwards. And that's not to mention insisting she walk behind him during red light, green light. But we do have to dock him points for voting to continue the games, knowing it would endanger his mom's life. But since his debt was much more severe than he let on, we'll give him some leeway. But honestly, not much. For our next game, we have the ultimate fumbling competition, in which your opponents will be Min-soo, player 125. And man, I believed in you, dude. He had all the makings of a lovable underdog character. Despite his lack of confidence and his scrawny build, he was taken under Simi's wing and ultimately welcomed onto Thanos' team, only to get easily pushed around. But sadly, this guy turned out to be a massive coward. And let me start by saying, we don't hate Min-soo for what he did, but, well, we do like him a lot less. During the Mingle game, he made the mistake of not only turning down a chance to hold Simi's hand, but effectively throwing her under the bus and joining his bullies. He does somewhat regain her respect after he decides to vote to terminate the games despite pressure from Thanos and 124. But even after a surprise attack where he dropped a glass bottle near 124, at which point I was certain he would jump in to save the literal one person who treated him with respect and compassion throughout the game. But no, he chickens out. Honestly, I almost felt like we needed a new Sinner medal just for this guy, the Chicken Medal. Next up, we have Dae-ho, player 388. A former Marine, he joined Gi-hun's team because of his admiration for him, bonding with Jung-bae right away over their experience in the military. On the whole, he is friendly and kind-hearted, always eager to cheer up anyone who needs it. Despite literally shaking in fear, he would risk his life during the final revolt to get more ammunition for his allies. But in what seemed to be either a panic attack or an episode of PTSD, he ended up fleeing and hiding along with the ammunition. We're gonna cut him some slack because it seems like he is suffering from PTSD, but still, man, you really fumbled big time here. Next is Myung-gi, player 333. This former crypto YouTuber is the aforementioned ex-boyfriend slash baby daddy of Jun-hee, whose poor advice caused $15.2 billion in losses when a coin he endorsed turned out to be a scam. While he's not a model citizen, he does have some level of decency to him. For one, he feels genuinely remorseful for how he ruined his relationship with 222, and sincerely offers an apology. And while he did ghost her for 6 months, this was at least partially to protect her from being associated with a now controversial celebrity. He also stood up for Min-soo in episode 6 during the bathroom fight, and was the one who finally defeated Thanos and save the multiverse with a single snap. And honestly, if it were up to me, I'd give him the gold medal of good just for killing this pink-haired goober. And next up is another character we would love to rank way higher. Choi Woo-seok is a gangster with a heart of gold. Or maybe silver, at least bronze. Whatever metal it's made of though, this guy's got a pretty good conscience for an organized criminal. He helps Gi-hun find the salesman in the beginning of season 2, and later joins Jun-ho in the search for the Squid Game Island to avenge his boss. We'd love to rank him higher, but we don't know exactly what his deal is outside of his search for the Squid Game location. And considering he's a gangster who works with dangerous loan sharks, that definitely raises a few eyebrows for us. Still, he's at least a decent guy who cares about his friends, and that's enough to keep him from falling any lower. And Mr. Kim falls just beneath his old friend. In the insanely intense rock, paper, scissors -1 game the suit man forces him and his friend to play, Mr. Kim had a blatant opportunity to win when his friend accidentally threw 2 rocks at once. Despite this, he intentionally refused to take one of his hands away, sacrificing his own life so his friend could live to see his wife again. We have to rank him just a little lower on the sole basis that Mr. Kim is a higher ranking gangster, which means he almost certainly has more blood on his hands. But for a greed-driven loan shark, he's definitely one of the more reasonable characters in the series. Now, we're nearing the end of the gray area, so it's time to talk about the girl who was great at everything except for the things she wasn't. And Meow, player 212, was, I'm just gonna say it, she was iconic. Sure, she was rude and dishonest, but not entirely evil. She was a woman just trying to survive any way she could, and she had 2 particular skills: arson and sex. So we give her the Lust Center medal for her usage of sexuality to manipulate others to join her team, to limited success. She uses her smarts to make friends with strong allies, and to her credit, she is loyal to them. That is, until they cross her. Once her limited time lover, Deok-soo, betrays her, she makes good on her promise to kill him later on by taking him down in the Glass Stepping Stones challenge. This may have been motivated by hatred and revenge, but by taking him down, she indirectly saved the lives of Gi-hun, Sung-woo, and Sae-byeok. Tack on the fact that she really doesn't seem keen on intentionally harming anyone, or anyone else, and you have a girl who's neither heroic nor villainous. Now, let's talk about a character whose morals seem to be a lot more complicated. Kang-neul. This former North Korean soldier was labeled a traitor when she made the quite reasonable decision to defect to the South. On top of the challenges that come with this, she's desperately searching for her daughter, who was left back in the North, which has given her a sort of soft spot for kids. Before joining the Squid Game as a worker, she worked as a theme park mascot who gave children lollipops and seemed to enjoy making them happy, even going as far as to visit one in the hospital to return her hat. Unfortunately, this isn't the start of one of the most weirdly wholesome Squid Game characters out there. As we mentioned, she is one of the Squid Game workers, meaning she's guilty of directly murdering multiple people. So sorry, but no amount of cute interactions with kids can save you here. We would place her in the evil category for the sheer fact that she's working in such a horrible game, but her conversation with her boss reveals that all she knew about the job was that she'd be putting hopeless people out of their misery. She also retains some moral conviction, like refusing to leave any eliminated contestants alive for fear they'd have their organs harvested while they were still alive. She doesn't lack compassion, but she's still willing to kill a lot of people to achieve her goals, which makes her one of the most morally questionable characters in the series. But still, we are rooting for her. And rounding out the gray area is Myung-gi, player 111. You'll remember this crooked doctor as the one who offered to harvest organs from deceased players in exchange for information on the games. Now, this is an absolutely depraved thing to do, of course, and the fact that he was willing to do it shows that he's got some serious moral faults. That said, in his defense, he's just using the skills he has to survive in a horrible situation. He never attempts to hurt his fellow contestants, only to survive any way he can, short of murder. When he suspects the staff is conning him, he attacks them out of a mix of anger, sleep deprivation, and panic. And given that they're his captors, we don't blame him much for this either. But finally, we get to the section you've all been waiting for. These characters are the bad and the evil. And I feel like placing Sung-woo, player 218, as our least evil bad guy is gonna have some of you guys pissed off. He's a very complex character despite being arguably the main antagonist of the first season. A childhood friend of Ji-hun's, he was a distinguished graduate of the Seoul National University. He had it made in life until he messed up by embezzling funds and ruining his image, leading him into the game so he could protect his mother from his poor decisions. But in his determination to right his wrongs, Sung-woo was ironically only adding more to this list. While he was a compassionate person by nature, like giving Ali money for the bus and checking on player 271, after Deok-soo murdered him, his ruthless nature distorted who he actually was as a person. During the marble game, he manipulated Ali into helping him win by tricking him into carrying a bag of pebbles instead of marbles, effectively murdering him in the process. He then rushed the glass manufacturer despite him being the only reason they made it as far as they did in round 5. And most egregiously, he murdered murdered Sae-byeok when she was already bleeding out just to make the final round easier on himself. But given his desperation to survive, we have to view most of his actions as necessary evils, rather than things he would do naturally. With the exception of Sae-byeok, Sung-woo only resorted to violence when he felt it was absolutely necessary. And if it weren't for that scene, we'd honestly just place him in the gray area. But while basically everything else he did was out of desperation, killing an already dying girl is one of the lowest things anyone else did. But let's talk about the self-proclaimed Shaman of the Sea, Seon-nyeo, player 044. Remember Hen Minyao? Well, we asked if she could come back for season 2, but all Netflix said was, "We have her at home." And out came this character. She seems to be some kind of weird psychic, instantly sensing that Gi-hun was at the Squid Game because of vengeful spirits, which is kinda true to her credit. Nonetheless, she also routinely threatens people, clearly views herself as above everyone. Literally, she almost never leaves her high-seated bed, and prayed for all of her former allies to die when they betrayed her. She isn't outright villainous, but if she actually is a shaman, she just attempted a quadruple homicide, which keeps her ranking pretty low here. Next is Captain Park, and we trusted you, man. Granted, according to the internet at large, we were naive to do so. But we still did, damn it. He seemed like a great guy at first, being the one who saved Jun-ho from drowning, and helping him find the island where the Squid Game was being held. Heck, he doesn't even ask for repayment, just for his new buddy to come back and catch squid with him. It's nice to see a character who's truly altruistic in such a morbid series. Then came episode 7, where he was found fiddling with the drones and resorted to killing a man for seeing him. He's almost certainly a double agent who's in league with the front man, likely trying to prevent Jun-ho and the rest from reaching him. Still, I guess he did save his life, so technically that's something at least. He's a minor character, but let's talk about player 278 real quick. He initially seemed like little more than a lackey to Deok-soo, but in actuality he was a lackey to Deok-soo who also had a serious inferiority complex. When the nature of the marble game was revealed, 278 immediately turned against Deok-soo and delighted in potentially getting him killed. That was until he ultimately lost and ran away. And I'll be the first to admit it, I was actually rooting for Deok-soo during this game. Okay, it's finally time to talk about Thanos, player 230. Thanos is a popular internet rapper who's visibly shocked when anyone doesn't know who he is, easily earning himself the Pride Center medal. The only time he's nice to people is when they're subservient to him, like promising to take pictures with his fans once they got out of the game. Thanos isn't a mastermind or anything, but he is an impulsive junkie with very few morals, which makes him pretty dangerous all the same. He killed multiple people in front of him during red light, green light, which would quite literally only serve to make the game harder on himself. For that, he earns both the Darwin Center medal and a few more points on the psychopath scale. He was also one of the most outspoken about keeping the games going on so he could get as much money as possible, and was always more than willing to start fights with anyone who opposed him, and ready to throw anyone he couldn't use under the bus. He does fill that love-to-hate role quite nicely for this season, and it was nice to see this guy take a fork to the jugular. But as bad as he was, his underling, player 124, is somehow even worse. He became friends with Thanos because they both lost money due to 333's accidental scam. Like Thanos, he's determined to keep the games going on as long as possible to make as much money as he can, which earns him the Greed Center medal. Seriously, at one point he said something along the lines of, "There are too many people still alive," being pretty direct about being an absolute depraved sociopath. He's also even more aggressive than Thanos. Like, at least he was kinda nice to Min-soo at first. This guy treated others like garbage until he had a reason not to. And he was the one who killed Simi. This guy was just a very creepy sociopath. Now, I'm not sure who everyone else's least favorite contestant was this season, but neither Thanos nor 124 did it for me. That dishonor goes to player 100. Like 124, he's very vocal about wanting to keep the games going as long as possible, and to make sure plenty of people die to increase the prize money. The difference is that this is quite literally his only characteristic. Every time this man makes an appearance on screen, he finds a way to start whining about how, "Yeah, we have to continue so I can kill people and get money for it." There isn't much to say about him other than the fact that he's a scumbag with no sense of compassion for others. And even so, he still doesn't make our bottom 5. So let's kick off the bottom 5 with the Suit Man, who you might remember as the one who recruited Gi-hun and the others for the Squid Game originally. He returns in Season 2, where we get to see more of his past, present, and lack of a future. This guy isn't just a psychotic accessory to murder. He's a sadistic creep who plays twisted games with vulnerable poor people to try and convince them their only option is to join a life-threatening competition. He goes beyond just doing this for work, sometimes even torturing people as a form of recreation, like when he forced these two friends to play rock, paper, scissors in Russian roulette, relishing in their terror. Later in the episode, it's revealed that this guy used to work in the games himself, and at one point, he came across his own father, who he shot without hesitation. Mind you, he didn't reflect on this with any level of somberness or remorse. He reflected on it with pride. But let's talk about the most infamous contestant from Season 1, Ilnam, Player 001. Now let's begin this entry with a moment of silence for those of us who absolutely loved this sweet old man, shed tears for his death, only to find out that he was the founder of the Squid Games. It turns out that Ilnam was a loan shark whose clients got so rich that they got bored. So he came to the perfectly reasonable conclusion of, hey, what if we just put poor people in a gymnasium and force them to play children's games under penalty of death? I think something was wrong with this guy way before the brain tumor, but with that being said, he seemed very aware of what he was doing. And when he finally got bored of watching the games play out as a VIP, he saw his end was coming near and decided to join in the fun for a while. To his credit, he did give them all a chance to back out by voting to stop the games after red light, green light. What's more is that his brain tumor was a true burden he had to carry, and he did seem to genuinely like and care for Gi-hun, sacrificing his chance to play in the final few rounds so he could live. But none of that even comes close to redeeming himself for his actions. This guy herded thousands of vulnerable people over the years to act as playthings for a few rich people to enjoy for a while before 99% of them were brutally murdered. And his excuse was, well, people are selfish anyway, so there. I mean, what? You mean like Gi-hun, who constantly treated you with respect, generosity, and overall altruism? Or like Ali, who risked his neck to save Gi-hun in the first game while knowing he could die for it? That said, we're giving the bronze medal of evil to Deok-soo, Player 101. And man, where do we even begin with this guy? There's just so many different aspects to his character, all of them horrible. He's a mass murderer, an organized gangster, a terrorist, a line cutter, and a straight-up sadist. This dude fully realized the danger of the game and showed his true colors upon seeing what happened to the victims. He beat 271 to death for the crime of trying to take the food Deok-soo took more of than he was allowed to, and smiled about it when he was pronounced dead. Not to mention laughing at the suicide of 69. And his final act was that of a coward. In the Glass Stepping Stones game, he refused to move forward until some of the other players came around him to test the waters. And unlike Sung-woo, who never resorted to violence unless he deemed it necessary, Deok-soo took sincere pleasure in both causing and witnessing the pain and misery of his fellow human beings, only allying himself with people as long as they were useful to him. But our silver medal of evil has to go to the front man. Placing him so low feels both perfectly sound and unfair at the same time, because Frontman needs a lot more fleshing out before we can determine whether he's pure evil or just broken pure evil. Look, no matter his backstory, the fact of the matter is that he's the one running the Squid Games and catering to the VIPs. On top of murdering countless people with no remorse and justifying it with the most impressively ludicrous mental gymnastics you could imagine, he also shot his own brother, who spent days undercover desperately trying to find him. All this is coming from someone who experienced the games firsthand, so he knew fully well of the horrors therein and thought, hey, maybe I should help keep this going. In Season 2, he makes his record even worse by joining the game as Player 1 and working alongside Gi-hun. He uses his dead wife and child as a manipulation tactic, has temper tantrums when the games don't go his way, tried to convince the others to give up after Game 2, all to prove a point that Gi-hun couldn't save the contestants from themselves. The worst part is that, in a sense, the frontman was absolutely right. After faking his death as Player 1 and returning to his classic role, he basically straight up said, "I told you so" to Gi-hun, before shooting his friend right before his very eyes. The frontman is definitely a villain, and nothing we find out about him will save him from this section. But it's possible that his wife's death might have caused something inside of his brain to snap. It's also implied that he joined the game initially to pay for her medical treatment, which, if true, would at least give some sense of humanity. But by process of elimination, you know where this is going. The VIPs are genuinely the most depraved human beings imaginable. Right off the bat, we'll give them the Gluttony Cinder Medal for their appetite for for pleasure, which seems to be all that drives them. They spend their days betting money on the contestants in the games, betting on them like gamblers bet on horses, and placing absolutely no value on their worth as human beings. One of them got mad at player 69 for hanging himself, not because he was sad about it, but because he just bet so much money on him. On top of that, nothing is enough for these guys. They're like adult babies crying for bottles filled with blood. Whether it's watching people be herded up like cattle and killed, treating their underlings like crap, straight up sexually harassing their staff, etc., these guys are all depraved creatures who we'd honestly be hesitant to qualify as even human. They're so detached from humanity that they lost all semblance of compassion and basic decency that they may have once had, which definitely earns them the easiest gold medal of evil we've ever handed out. Not that they need any more gold.